Another way that we can represent fractions and decimals is by using a hundredths grid. The hundredths grid is going to help us to represent decimals in the tenths and the hundredths. It's not going to help us with thousandths, but tenths and hundredths is a really good starting place for us. So we're going to use it to represent, let's say, 7/10. Now the decimal 7/10 is our decimal point and a 7 in the tenth spot. And when I'm looking at my grid, I know that I have 10 columns in total. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So my decimal point is telling me that I need 7 out of those 10, 7/10. So I'm going to shade in 10 full columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Right? This is showing me that of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 columns, I've shaded 7 of them. That's exactly the same as our fraction 7/10. 7/10 in decimal form is the same as the fraction 7/10, and we can represent that in a hundredths grid by coloring in 7 of the 10 columns of our grid. If we wanted to do that in hundredths, instead of looking at full columns, we're going to look at those individual squares because our whole grid is made up of 100 individual squares. So if I want to do 7/10, but to do it in hundredths, instead of 7/10, I'm going to end up doing 70 hundredths, right? This is our decimal 70 hundredths because 70 is ending in that hundredths spot. So I'm going to color in over top 70 of those individual ones. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, and 70. As you can see, 70 hundredths has the exact same footprint as 7/10. That's because they're equivalent fractions and they're equivalent decimals. So we can use our chart to show us both decimals and fractions. If we wanted to show, for example, let's do 34 hundredths. 34 hundredths. Because I'm doing hundredths, I'm going to need to be using these cubes, right? Because these are showing each individual one is 100. I want 34 hundredths, which looks like this is a decimal, right? We read it normally 34. My 4 is in the hundredth spot, so this is representing 34 hundredths. I'm going to shade in 34 of these. And I am not going to make you listen to me count them all this time. We'll get it done a little bit more quickly. We've already got 30 because I have 3 columns of 10, and we're looking for 34 hundredths. If I wanted to show, let's say, 4/10, and we wanted to compare them, I'm just going to look at my columns, and I'll do that in blue so we can see the difference. We're going to shade 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. Right, so now that we've done that, we can compare those decimals. We started with 34 hundredths and we've represented that in the purple. And then we have the decimal 4/10. And a lot of times when we're comparing decimals, the mistake that we make is we look at this 4 and think, oh, well, 4 is smaller than 34. But what we have to recognize is that a tenth, and remember the tenth is this whole column, is going to be a lot larger than just your single hundredth, right? A hundredth is just one of these tiny little squares. So even though I have 34 hundredths, it's smaller than my 4/10 because my 4/10, if you counted these up, is the exact same as 40 hundredths. So when you're comparing decimals, if you're comparing one that happens to be in the tenth spot, so let's say we had 8/10, and I want to compare that to, let's say, something like 87 hundredths, and then I wanted to compare that as well to 63 hundredths. One of the easiest things to do is just to fill your tenth in with a 0 to make it an equivalent in the hundredths. That's going to help us to remember that, in fact, even though this is just an 8, it's 8 tenths, which we would represent over here as 8 of these full columns. Right? There's our 8 tenths, which is exactly the same as 80 of these hundredths. So if I'm ordering them and I want to go from greatest to least, well, I know 87 is greater than 80, so 87 hundredths is going to come first because that's the same as these 8 tenths plus 7 more of my hundredths, so that clearly is going to be larger. And then if I'm looking at 63 hundredths, well, I know that 63 is going to be less than 80, and it's going to be less than 87. So in greatest to least, we have 87 hundredths, 8 tenths, which is the same as 80 hundredths, and then 63 hundredths.